story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain, angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, ye from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. 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 Jesus provides a rest. Wonderful story.
Finish chapter 19 first. Starting in verse 26. You shall not eat anything with blood, nor practice divination or soothsaying. You shall not round off the side growth of your heads, nor harm the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuts in your body for the dead, nor make any tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not profane your daughter by making her a harlot, so that the land may not fall into harlotry, and the land become full of lewdness. You shall keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or spiritists. Do not seek them out to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So there's a whole list of things that are forbidden here. People are not to eat blood. The one that's interesting about this one is actually repeated in the New Testament. You'll recall in Acts chapter 15 when there was that big debate going on among the brethren about the aspects of the old law that they should impose upon the Gentile Christians. There were some Judaizing teachers that were going out essentially telling folks, you got to become a Jew in order to be a Christian. So you had to be circumcised, and there were certain things about Judaism that they were continuing to bind. And they all headed back up to Jerusalem, or Judea, which is where this teaching came from. It was Jerusalem. But anyway, where this teaching had come from, because that's where the people that were gone out and teaching this departed from. Paul and all of those teachers all go back to Jerusalem, sit down with the apostles and the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, and have a full discussion of these things. When you get to the end of that discussion, the advice that they give is that people should refrain from blood and from things that are strangled. And no other obligation should be placed on them. So circumcision is out the window, and keeping the Sabbath is out the window, and festival keeping, feast keeping is out the window. You can't bind any of that on the Gentiles, but tell the Gentiles not to eat blood. Now, that's unique about those things. And I tie it directly to what we've been studying here in Leviticus 17 and 18 primarily, when we are expressly told that the life is in the blood. And so if you killed an animal, if it was for sacrifice purposes, what were you required to do? You collected the blood, you bled the animal, you collected the blood, and the blood was poured out on the altar to God. What if you killed an animal to eat? I'm sorry? Yeah, you had to bleed the animal, collect the blood, and bury the blood in the earth. And he said, it's because life is in the blood. He was teaching them to respect life. And I think that there's a connection between that idea and this. Now, there are cultures where blood is consumed. Uh, this culture has, at least historically, been willing to consume particularly pork blood in boudin. The Vietnamese culture cooks with blood. Even in England, there's blood sausage, and also known as blood pudding, that includes the blood. I'm not completely positive that cooking with it is what's under consideration here, because there's also a lot of other cultures that believe that you can get power from consuming blood. There's a culture in Africa that when they kill a bull, they actually put a straw into its jugular, drain that, and drink it while it's warm, just out of the body. Yeah, I have the same reaction. Uh, but then there's a lot of cultures, especially the barbarian cultures of Northern Europe, that believed that if they consumed the blood of their enemies when they killed their enemies, that they got the power of their enemy. And it is in that setting that the New Testament, and even I'm presuming some of the cultures during the Old Testament days, was set. And I think there's probably likely some connection to those kinds of practices. And he's saying, you don't do that. And he's being absolute with the thing. If you don't do it with even animals, then you certainly don't come to the point that you do it with people. It is largely those practices that have given rise to the stories like of vampires and other horror stories, um, have historically arisen from those cultural practices. And so there's a lot of these practices that are to one extent or another cultural. Divination and soothsaying, not really a problem in America much, except for New Orleans. Um, Certain markings, and this is one that gets a lot of talk today, especially with translations like um, the New American Standard Bible. I'm not sure if every translation uses the word tattoo. Pretty sure the King James does. You shall not make any cuts in your body for the dead, nor make any tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. I am not convinced that that language is intended to be specifically the practice of modern tattooing, just using ink. Um, I'm convinced that it was significant marks on the body for a purpose, that it was connected to the practices and beliefs of some of these cultures. I don't know all of the history and all of the aspects of the cultures that they were running into, and so I'm not going to talk out of turn by acting like I do. But I do know this: in Polynesian cultures, tattooing is very important. It's very spiritual. It is you get certain tattoos for certain things and to make certain statements and to draw from certain sources of power and certain gods that and I think that the distinctive mark, the fact that it's a distinctive mark, is important. Um, I don't have any tattoos. I have no desire to have any tattoos. Um, but I'm not one of those people that freaks out because someone had one. I did know a man who had gotten tattooed when he was in the Navy. He became a faithful Christian, and it was to the day he died. He died in his 90s. To the day he died, it was it just haunted him because of this passage. He just almost could not stand the fact that he had done that when he didn't know any better. I'm not real sure that this is talking about an anchor and mom. I think this is talking about spiritual tattoos and tattoos claiming association and connection to specific cultural things and deities and beliefs that were foreign to God, just like soothsayers is appealing to other sources, to the dead, for information rather than accepting the information that comes from God. You want to know what's on the other side of death? Well, God has told us all that we need to know about what's on the other side of death. We shouldn't be appealing to try to talk to the dead to get information. Um, and so I think that that's what's really at play here. Daughters are not to be made prostitutes. I don't even know why that's a thing. I don't know any father that would go, hey, I think I want to make my daughter a prostitute. Um, but apparently it was a problem. And it was an issue of their culture. And again, I'm going to say this because I do know this is true, that a lot of the deities, part of the worship involved fornication, and they had prostitutes associated with that that supplied that. And some of those cultures could have very well thought that it would have been a godly service to use their daughters for that. And he's just telling them, we don't do that. That is not what we do, because in the language here is interesting. So that the land may not fall to harlotry. It's not that he doesn't care about the girl, but he's talking about something else here. So that the land may not fall to harlotry and the land become full of lewdness. This is to some extent what we would call a slippery slope argument, where he is saying, look, if we practice this, there will be no barriers. And it's going to get even more when we get into chapter 20 about some things that seem so foreign to me as a parent. But yet he still had to expressly tell them, hey, don't do this. But anyway, after that, he says the Lord's Sabbaths are to be kept. Mediums and spiritists are not to be consulted, which is a little bit different than divination and soothsaying, but all of those practices are kind of lumped together in the same magical arts, mysticism, looking for power and advantage from a source other than God. And just not a good thing. So he talks about all that, verses 32 through 36. Holiness is in honor, justice, and integrity. Verse 32, the aged are to be honored. Have respect for older people, which is, by the way, not common in our current culture. Some cultures in the world, it is quite common to revere those who are older and to respect them. But we tend to think that once you become weak and can't productively contribute, then you need to get out of the way. And he's saying, don't be that way. Have respect and honor the aged. The strangers to be treated as the native born. Don't make distinctions about people based on ethnicity, nationality, or any of that kind of stuff. Just because someone is from a foreign country doesn't mean that they're any less human than you. They're due the respect that all human beings are due. Now, does that mean that there aren't differences in relationship? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I would hope, I'll let Wesley speak for himself, I would hope that I've always treated Wesley with respect, treated him like a human should be treated. But I'll guarantee I treated him very differently than I've treated my father or my children, or, well, they're all men, they're all people, but there's a difference in relationship. I treat women with respect, but I certainly hope that I treat them different than I treat my daughter, or especially my wife. There are differences in relationship. It's okay for there to be differences in relationship. It's okay for people to have an affinity for their people. and their nation or their state. And to feel that automatic connectedness that you have from somebody that comes from the same place and culture that you come from. You can do that without disrespecting other people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that think that the only way I can truly show respect to my people is by making everyone else my enemy. And he's saying, no, you treat them with respect. The Lord reminds them, you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And again, we've talked about this a lot before. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's what he's telling them. Remember that you once were the aliens. And by the way, how had they been treated in Egypt at the beginning? They had actually been treated very well. They were given some of the best land to live on and occupy. And apparently didn't have to pay for it. It was just given to them. And they prospered greatly because of that. And then a generation died off and a new generation came along. The Bible says did not know Joseph. And all of a sudden they viewed them as outsiders and therefore enemies. And they subjugated them to slavery. And he said, I want you to remember that. Remember what it was like as aliens and strangers in Egypt to be treated the way that you were treated. Don't treat people that come into your land that way. Now, does that mean that you can't have borders? No. Does that mean that you can't have laws? No. Does that mean that you can't expect people to follow your laws? Absolutely not. But you can treat people humanely as you enforce laws. And so that's what he's telling them. Justice is a measurement in justice in measurements and trade. Verses 35 and 36. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight, or in capacity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am the Lord your God. You do business with people, you treat them right. You sell them a dozen eggs, they get a dozen eggs. You hire yourself out to paint their house. You paint their house with paint. You don't water it down and make whitewash out of it. And then charge them for a paint job. You don't use low-grade lumber and then charge them as though you're using the best. You be honest with them and fair with them. You don't sell them something that you know has got problems without disclosing the problems. Be just. Don't put your thumb on the scale. Anybody ever heard that idiom? They got their thumb on the, that's actually comes from a practice where people would literally press on the scale so that the weight would go higher and they could charge more and give less. Don't be that way. Be just in your measurements and in your weights. Honest scales and measures are not an option, they're a commandment. And it should be the case that the most honest people to do business with in this world are people that are in fellowship with God. Unfortunately, not everyone who claims to be in fellowship with God lives that way. And if we're going to be associated with God, God is saying, okay, I'm holy. And that means I'm fair and I'm just and I'm honest. So you need to be fair and just and honest. That's what's required of you. So verse 37, you shall thus observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them. I am the Lord. I'm going to tell you real quick. He hasn't given every ordinance and statute and obligation in that chapter. He's given some examples in that chapter and then said, now this applies to everything. Sorry, let's move into chapter 20, which is where I should have been 25 minutes ago. Um, the Lord established that there is a penalty. This is the one that we're liable to get caught up in for the rest of the class, is these opening verses. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and again, here's another chapter. We've seen this over and over and over again in this book. Every chapter begins with that statement. Who is doing the speaking? God. Don't ever forget that. The Lord said to Moses, this is not from Moses, this is from God. You shall also say to the sons of Israel, any man from the sons of Israel, or from the alien sojourning in Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will also set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given some of his offspring to Molech, so as to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. If the people of the land, however, should ever disregard that man when he gives any of his offspring to Molech, so as not to put him to death, then I myself will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut off from among their people both him and all those who play the harlot after him by playing the harlot after Molech. And I'm going to stop right there and just make this observation for the benefit of Bible study later on. When you're studying especially when you get to the New Testament letters, you will find language like that from time to time where it just says playing the harlot. When it's talking about that in a context and it's clearly a spiritual reference, he is talking about simply being unfaithful to God. Putting your confidence, your association, your trust in something else other than God. You can play the harlot with God by appealing to yourself. You can play the harlot with God by appealing to science. You can play the harlot with God by putting all your confidence and hope in the government, which is men. Any of those, that is not whom we, and here's the other language that gets used, whom we're betrothed to. We're betrothed to God. And so to give our affections to someone else is adultery, which is the same thing that he has in mind when he talks about playing the harlot here. That's kind of a sidebar. The main focus of this 5 verses is this idea of offering your offspring to Molech. What is that? Okay, for those of y'all that know, that bell means I got 5 minutes. We got to finish this in 5 minutes. What does it mean to offer your offspring to Molech? Okay, this was one of the gods of the people who occupied that land before them and the nations in the area around them. What's it mean to give your offspring to Molech? Yeah, it was child sacrifice. Now, there are people who will say, well, that's not really child sacrifice, it's under consideration here. That's just giving your child to the temple of Molech to be used as a slave for the. I don't think that you can sustain that. I think that if you go to chapter 18, verse 21, if you go to Jeremiah 32, 35, 2 Kings 23, 10, Ezekiel 16, 20 and 21, Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 31, you look at those passages, it is very clear what's under consideration here. Part of worshiping Molech involved people offering their offspring, burning their children in a fire to honor this false god. I can't imagine a situation where God felt like he actually had to spend as much time as he spends in as many books as he spends time, through as many prophets as he spends time, telling the people over and over again, don't do this. It seems so counterintuitive to me that anybody would ever take their child and hand them over to be burned but apparently it was a problem. Now, there are a lot of people who take issue with the argument that I'm fixing to make, but I'm going to make it anyway because I believe that it is a fair argument. The closest practice that we have to this today, anybody want to guess what it is? Abortion. Where people are giving up their children to death for their own convenience, for their own, ultimately, selfishness in worship. It's self-worship. It's not to Molech, it's to self. But when you talk to people and you get right down to it, the arguments you're getting, well, what if someone can't afford a baby right now? What if someone doesn't want their lifestyle altered? I actually have some literature from places that are offering these practices to people that actually says right in the literature, maybe this isn't the right that you want to pursue, and a child is going to weigh you down. You don't have to deal with that right now. Uh, there is little difference. I don't know exactly what their motivation was, but whatever their motivation was, they were offering their children to something that they thought was going to benefit them in some way, and not respecting the fact that that child belongs to God, made in God's image, given life by God. It's not mine to offer. It's not any more appropriate for me to offer my child to something than it is for me to offer your house for sale or your car for sale. Not only do I not own myself, I don't own my children. I've been entrusted by God with my children. And I'll give an account to Him for the way that I raise them and the way that I treat them. And it's not negotiable. We need to respect life. That's what all of these chapters are about. Since chapter 17, when it's been introduced to us that life is in the blood and that you need to respect this with regard to the way you treat it, he's moved straight up to people and said, you do not offer people as if they are something. You respect life. And he makes the same argument here that he made way back in Genesis about murder, which he said if someone takes a human life without cause, something should happen. By man shall his blood be shed. If you are going to wantonly take human life, disregard the value of human life, and just kill someone for no good reason, God has placed upon the balance of humanity the responsibility to execute judgment against them by taking their life. And he does the same thing here. And he goes even to the next point, which is when we get down to verse 5. No, not very old. Here we go, over here. Maybe it is verse 5. No, verse 4. If the people of the land, however, should ever disregard that man when he gives any of his offspring to Molech so as not to put him to death. In other words, if I just decide, you know what, it's not a cool thing to take life, and so I know he killed his child, but I just can't, I don't have the heart to put him to death. God says, if that's going to be your attitude, then I myself will set my face against that man and against his family. I will cut off from among their people both him and all those who play the harlot after him by playing the harlot after him. I will cut. If you don't do it, I will. And the implication is this is not a choice. If I'm going to be just and have the sense of justice, and if I'm going to love and respect life and have the sense of love and respect for life that God has, then I honor this. and society honors this. And we get everything upside down sometimes. And we protect the people who are doing unrighteous things. And we persecute the people who are trying to do righteous things. And he goes down, I don't have time to get to it tonight, I'll have to talk about it more next time, but he goes down and he says, ultimately, if you live that way, the land's going to vomit you out of the land. Now, why that's important is because if you go back to when he started talking about this, he told them that the reason they had the land that they were going to take is because the land had vomited the people before them out. Now, how did they leave the land? This isn't some mystical statement. How did the people of Canaan get vomited out by the land? I'm going to tell you how. By the army of Israel with the power of God going in and exterminating them. And so what he is telling Israel is, if you don't follow my commands with regard to these things, you will be cut off just the way I cut them off. And what eventually happened to Israel? The exact same thing. A foreign army was brought to power and brought in to eradicate them and move them off the land and destroy them. And so we have to keep that in mind. Now, all that matters to us, because if we disregard the commands of God, we have a much more severe thing. We're not going to lose our land. We're not even going to lose our physical body. We're told not to fear someone who can take the life out of our body, but to fear instead the one who has power over both our body and soul. God is going to destroy our souls in everlasting destruction. We're going to be cast into hell, which he calls the second death, and that's not a good thing. All right, got to stop. Appreciate everybody's participation. Lord wills, we'll pick up in chapter 20, verse 6 next time.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love.